disappeared, there was a great fear of a serial killer. We all thought we were dying.
In 1976, a disturbing event took place in the small town of Chowchilla, California. When 26 children disappeared one afternoon on their way home from school, the country went into a frenzy. Take a trip with us down a path of greed, privilege, and evil that changed dozens of lives forever. Frank Edward Ray, better known as Ed, was a small-town farmer from La Grande, California. He was born on February 26, 1921, to his loving parents, Frank and Mary Ray. As one of 8 children, he grew up with strong family values and the ability to spread kindness to every person he met. In the late 1930s, his family moved to Chowchilla, California, a sleepy town in the Madera County. At the time, the population was just under 5,000 people. Named after the indigenous tribe of Chowchilla, a Yokut native tribe that once lived in the area, the original meaning of the word was murderers, due to a warlike nature of the Chowchilla tribe. However, it was later associated by the Yokuts tribe in another term, for bravery. The origin of the town's name seemed to be an ominous description of events that took place in the area, including the infamous crimes of Charles Manson, the Zodiac Killer, and the kidnapping of Patty Hearst. In the early 1950s, after growing corn and raising cattle on his farm with his wife Odessa, a humble bank teller, and their sons, Glenn and Danny, Ed became a bus driver for Dairyland Elementary. He loved interacting with the kids every day and bringing smiles to their faces. He was known for being a patient and reliable man. He wasn't a tall man, 5'7", 5'8", stout, probably weighed about 200 pounds in his prime, barrel-chested. My family is built like that. You don't know where our chest stops and our belly begins, described Ed's nephew, Ronnie Ray. On July 15, 1976, Ed was driving 26 children home from school, ranging in age from 5 to 14, including 10-year-old Linda Carejo Labandera, 10-year-old Jody Heffington Medrano, 9-year-old Jennifer Brown Hyde, 6-year-old Larry Park, 9-year-old Darla Neal, and 14-year-old Michael Marshall, when he noticed a white 71 Dodge van parked across the country road, blocking his path. As the good Samaritan he was, he decided to pull over and see if the patrons of the van needed help. As he slowed to a stop, he was confronted by 3 armed men wearing nylon face coverings and carrying a sawed-off. One of them proceeded to aim the at Ed's head, while another took over driving the bus, and the third followed in the white van. The men then drove to the Berenda Slough, a shallow branch of the Chowchilla River, to transfer all 26 children and their bus driver into the original van and a second van, both with reinforced paneling. The hijackers attempted to hide the school bus in a large grassy area full of bamboo, then forced the children to jump from the bus to the vans so that they did not leave footprints in the mud. After the victims were crammed into small, stifling vans, they drove around for 11 hours, singing songs like If You're Happy and You Know It, Boogie Fever, and Get Down Tonight, in an attempt to keep their spirits high, before the men pulled over and began putting them all underground in a tractor trailer at a rock quarry, 100 miles away from Chowchilla in Livermore, California. Imagine the state the children were in after being driven around in vans with little ventilation, no food or drink, and unable to go to the bathroom, all while in the hot July sun. The situation then became 10 times worse as the children were removed from the bus one by one, and the hijackers documented their names, ages, addresses, phone numbers, and even a piece of clothing or a belonging from each one, then forced them down a ladder into a dark hole in the ground. Even at the tender age of 9, Jennifer Brown Hyde remembers feeling like an animal going to the slaughterhouse. She claimed it was dark, the windows were painted in, no one could see in, and no one could see out. It was hot, over 100 degrees, no water, no bathroom. By this point, the children's parents were desperately seeking answers when their children did not return home from summer school. The parents helped the police by tracing the route the bus took every day and eventually found the abandoned school bus near the Chowchilla River. Within hours, 30 FBI agents arrived at the scene to investigate. At the same time, the hijackers were attempting to hold the group of children and Ed ransom for $5 million. Luckily, the phones were tied up by calls from the media and worried families, so they were unable to get through. An aerial search was also underway, with over 400 reporters and 60 press phones and operators. In a completely unrelated event, a lightning strike cut electricity to most of the town that night. Parents lit candles and held a vigil for the missing children at the site of the found school bus. There was a great fear of a serial killer. People formed a search posse on horseback, and it was just a fear that we were going to find bodies, claimed Ed's nephew, Ronnie. We thought it was UFOs, and it seemed like it had to be. No way it could be anything else, said an unidentified state trooper's wife who was on the search committee. Some people even questioned Ed's integrity, wondering if he had been the one to kidnap the children. Even though Ed had no criminal record, a reporter asked if he could be involved in the crime. Once the children and Ed were forced into the tractor trailer 12 feet underground, they heard the sound of dirt hitting the roof and realized they were being buried alive. The group was given minimal supplies of water, cereal, peanut butter, and bread. The hijackers also created makeshift toilets out of the wheel wells of the tractor trailer. The men never explained why they were abducting the children. I only recall them ever telling us to shut up and be quiet, remembers survivor Linda Correjo Labandera. 2 poorly manufactured ventilation pipes were the group's only supply of air, as the roof slowly began caving in from the weight of the dirt. As the hours passed, the children became increasingly more terrified, believing they would die down there. The trailer began to smell like vomit, urine, and feces as the children ran out of food and water. Ed decided he had to try and save the children's lives, so he gathered the older children and began stacking mattresses up towards the hole they entered. There were times we all thought we were dying, Linda claimed. The fans they put in, the batteries had died. In my small mind, you think, that's it. After hours of attempting to escape, Ed realized that not only were they buried under many feet of dirt, they also had a heavy sheet of metal weighed down by 200-pound industrial batteries on top of them. We can't imagine what was going through Ed's mind at the time. Not only would you be worried for your own life, but now you have to save 26 children from what seemed to be their imminent deaths. As young Jody held a flashlight, Ed and Michael began digging away at the dirt and pushing the debris with a piece of wood that was going to be used to hold the roof up. If we're going to die, we're going to die doing something, Jody claimed. We are not going to die sitting here. Edward's digging up and out, Mike's digging, Jeff's digging, Robert's digging, recalls Linda. Little Linda hid the entire time she was in the tractor trailer, terrified of the kidnappers. Are they waiting for us up there? And are we going to get for coming out? Because all you saw with them were guns. However, Ed, Michael, and the other students miraculously managed to clear a path and pull the other children out after 16 hours buried underground. Linda was one of the last students to leave the tractor trailer, still terrified that the kidnappers were outside watching them.
I was still scared. I didn't want everyone trying to go out. I was leery. I thought they were up there still with guns. I was so scared I was one of the last ones out.
As they ventured away from the hole, they noticed a small building just above the quarry. They saw a man standing there and ran towards him. He noticed them immediately and exclaimed, "This world's been looking for you." A 28-hour ordeal came to an end as police escorted Ed and the 26 children to a place close by called the Santa Rita Rehabilitation Center, a local jail located in Alameda County. Here, the children were given apples and soda and examined by doctors as police took photos of each child for evidence and interviewed them all, including Ed. After 4 hours at the rehabilitation center, the children boarded another bus back to Chowchilla, where they were reunited with their families.
I felt like I was finally safe,
Claimed Larry Park, who was only 6 years old at the time. To this day, people across America remember how shocked they were to find out that all 26 children and Ed survived. Investigators began to dig out the tractor trailer, hoping they would find clues that would lead them to the Assigned to the case was the Madera County Sheriff, Ed Bates. Considered to be tough on crime, he was known to be fearless in the face of danger. There was also a well-known story about him once parking his squad car in the middle of a bridge and leaning against his hood with a The Hells Angels were apparently heading into Madera County, but they never made it past the sheriff. My wife was with me, and we were just getting in the car when the call came in that one of our deputies was checking the route of the Chowchilla bus snap case, said the sheriff. I can't help but think anybody who would do this, who would take the boys and girls and them, whatever their motive, can't help but be psychotic. The affected every single person. The amount of unity pulling together was beautiful, but things changed. After that, you didn't see kids on the street. If you did, their parents were grasping them for dear life, claimed Patty Mandrell, one of the reporters from the town's newspaper. False tips were being called in by the masses. The FBI sent out officers on horses, a four-wheel drive unit, and had radio operators. Let me tell you something, the sheriff begins. No one is going to try and get away with hurting 26 children and a bus driver. Where are they going to hide him? Where are they going to put them? They have to take care of them somehow. Whoever did this doesn't want to hurt your children. They want money. And you haven't got any money. They're going to ask the government to provide it. Nobody else has money like that. The town held an event called Ed Ray and Children's Day, with a parade and barbecue. Letters of support came from all around the world, including Hong Kong, Brazil, and Australia. However, it wasn't enough for the parents. They were happy their children made it home safely, but no one could sleep comfortably until they knew the kids were found. I wouldn't let them live if I got a hold of them, exclaimed Ed. By July 19th, the police had traced one of the vans used in the kidnapping. The sheriff put out an APB, All Points Bulletin, which is an electronic information broadcast send-out to communicate an important message. 50 state and local investigators were searching up and down the West Coast for the men. On July 22nd, Frederick Newall Woods IV was officially named as one of the suspects. The following day, the police found the ransom note and the written plans for the heist when they did a search on Fred's father's estate. They claimed to be members of an unknown satanic group called Beelzebub. The term is another name for Satan in the Christian religion. The vans were found shortly after, with over 4,000 pieces of evidence inside. Fred was a 24-year-old man with long blonde hair and a funny mustache. As most people with the fourth at the end of their names, he came from a family with money. His father, Frederick Newall Woods III, owned an estate in Bay Area town of Portola Valley called Hawthorns and owned the rock quarry that the children were buried in. Fred IV lived in an apartment garage behind his grandmother's cottage on the property. Fred and his friends were known to blow through money and act recklessly, including using regularly. Fred was a loner in school who eventually started a business with his friend, James Schoenfeld, buying, selling, and repairing old cars with his family's money. He also had another business with his friend, David Boston, a filmmaking major at San Jose State. They started a business in 1972 called Townhouse Enterprises, where they dream of flipping cars to finance David's film projects. Fred wrote a letter to David after watching the film Dirty Harry, claiming he wanted to conduct a heist of his own. Dirty Harry is a film about a guy who hijacks a school bus and asks for a ransom in flight out of Santa Rosa before fleeing a quarry and holding a kid at Sound somewhat familiar? Fred began making a plan with his friend James and James's brother, Richard. They assigned roles to each other. Fred was the leader, James was the planner, and apparently, Richard was just along for the ride. They all decided they were going to come up with a heist to get money from the government. I kept thinking, the state's got more money than it needs, James later said in his testimony. They won't miss $5 million. So I thought, is there a way to get this money? Is there some way I can get a lot of money to solve all my problems? The only thing I could think of was a kid. They came up with a plan to find multiple victims for multiple millions. They believed it had to be children because they figured people would do anything for children. They also figured it had to be related to a school since keeping kids safe at school was the government's responsibility. I wasn't going to commit any crime, risk my life, or risk my reputation for anything less than $1 million. So a bank robbery wouldn't work, a deal wouldn't work. The state pays us the ransom, we are happy forever. All our troubles are solved and we let the victims go. Everybody's happy. Another delusional statement by James. It's pretty pathetic that 3 wealthy kids wanted to commit a of children for money they didn't even necessarily need. The FBI employed all their manpower to find Fred and the Schoenfeld brothers. After Ed and the children escaped, Fred and James drove to their safe house in Reno. Using a fake passport, Fred flew to Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada, leaving James behind to fend for himself. On July 18th, James attempted to drive across the border to Canada as well, but was turned away by Border Patrol because he was nervous and had a car full of We're still wondering how these idiots were able to inflict so much torture on so many innocent young children. He attempted to get rid of the guns and tried crossing the border in another town, but was once again turned away as Fred had left guns in the center console and trunk that James had somehow missed during his first clearing of firearms from the car. Luckily for the police, he continued to journal all of his actions. His written notes also suggest that he was tired and didn't have the capacity to run from the law forever. With a guilty conscience, he decided to go home and turn himself in. However, on his way back, he was pulled over in Ontharian, California, due to the APB out on his license plate. Fred, however, made it to Vancouver by 6 p.m. on the Saturday after the kidnapping. He paid for a hotel room in cash and asked the manager if he had any work for him. He seemed like a big dunce of a kid, claimed the hotel manager. He dressed like a cowboy and grinned all the time. As he waited for James in the hotel, he wrote a letter to David telling him that his crime would make a good movie of the week, if not a feature. My end is not exciting enough, so you might have to kill some people or something. If you do make it into a film, all I want is a percentage of it. You make it up, I don't care how much, but be fair. The FBI was aware that Fred had been mailing letters out under another name, Richard Snyder. When he sent David the letter, they knew they had him. The FBI agents waited outside the hotel for Fred to return and arrested him on site. That night, they were taken to Sheriff Bates' local jail to await their court dates. However, some of the townsfolk were still unhappy with the outcome. They sent the sheriff a letter saying they were available if he wanted someone to come and hit the 3 men. The sheriff obviously said no. Nobody's taking those prisoners out of jail except by lawful authority. The same night, someone drove by the jail and shot the windows out with a but the 3 men were not hurt. On July 25, 1977, the men pleaded guilty on 27 counts of for ransom without inflicting bodily injury, reversing their initial pleas. In exchange for the plea deals, the prosecution dropped the 18 counts of armed robbery. The men were then charged on 5 counts of with bodily harm, to which they pled not guilty, as it carried a mandatory sentence of life without parole in California. The case went to trial, and the men waived the option for a jury, leaving the decision up to the Superior Court Judge, Leo Deegan. The trial received lots of media attention in the fall of 1977. However, the men remained mostly silent and straight-faced the entire time. Their defense team attempted to prove they deserved a chance at parole since the victims had survived unharmed. Ed was the first witness on the stand. Then, each child testified, one by one. They spoke in whispers about fainting, nose scratches, bruises, and stomach aches they experienced in what they called the hole. The children experienced nightmares, phobias, and other psychiatric side effects of the abduction, but the testimonies were not used in court as their parents refused to allow their children to undergo examination by the defense's psychiatrists. What happened when Jennifer was singing? Asked Alameda County Assistant District Attorney Joanne Perrielli. Nobody clapped. Cynthia Van Hoff, another 9-year-old victim, replied. Jennifer's mother claimed she didn't even show a sign of recognition at all when she finally saw her. She had no expression. It was completely blank. It was like she was sleepwalking. When Ed was asked if he should have handled the situation differently, he thought for a moment and responded with, "If it happened again, I'd do the same things again. Except I wouldn't stop for a van in the road." The trial finally ended on December 15, 1977. The judge claimed that the level of terror the children experienced was proof of bodily harm. The convictions, however, were eventually overturned due to the men's expensive attorneys, and they became eligible for parole. Richard was paroled in 2012, and his brother was released in 2015. The brothers moved to Mountain View, California to care for their mother, and haven't spoken to the media about the case since. However, at James's final parole hearing, 39 years after the crime, he admitted to his motive. He just wanted a nice car. "I wanted to fit in with these new people that we just moved next to," he said at his hearing. "And my friend's parents had twin Ferraris, his and hers, with telephones in them. My dad lent me some money. I bought a Jaguar. I found out that the insurance was more than I made in a whole year, so 2 months later I had to sell the Jaguar. I just figured I needed money. Money would solve all my problems." A statement that rang true to what he had mentioned before in his testimony. Fred remains in prison after being denied parole in 2019. He's been denied parole over 15 times. His parents have since died and left him their fortune, so it is believed that he's getting whatever he wants in prison. Sheriff Bates had said, "When you got that kind of money, you can get other prisoners to do anything you want." Many people find it hard to believe he will ever get out of prison, even with another chance of parole in 2024. In 2021, he was caught running a used car dealership and a Christmas tree lot, both in California, from inside of his prison cell. He has also repeatedly been caught with contraband. He purchased a mansion on the coast the same year. The more infamous Ed became, the more he withdrew from society. The media tried to make him a celebrity, but he wanted none of it. The last thing he wanted was to see reporters peering over his fence. He went on to continue driving his bus route and appeared on an episode of Hollywood Squares, but that was about all the fame he could stand. The town eventually renamed its biggest park Ed Ray Park. They had a full ceremony, but Ed's family briefly took the stage and exited. The entire town refuses to speak about the event that took place. It was rude to discuss. It was one of those things we discussed privately so we wouldn't forget it, but there were no memorials. We never got together, but we weren't ashamed. It was out of respect. The kids who were involved were hurt, and it scared the hell out of everybody. It was solemn, claimed one of Chowchila's mayors, Dennis Hayworth. Hayworth was only 3 years old when the events took place, but he still recalls a memory from a couple of years after the when he was eating dinner with his dad in Tonga, Polynesia. They sat next to a couple from New Zealand and mentioned they were originally from Chowchila, California. The lady asked him if he had been on the bus that fateful day. When I told my mom after we got back home, she just said, yeah, it affected every parent on the planet. There are people who kept their kids home from school in other countries because it scared them so bad. If it can happen in this tiny little town, it can happen anywhere. Nobody's safe. The kids were given a free trip to Disneyland, but nothing could change the trauma and pain that often left them awake at night. I still sleep with a nightlight, says Jennifer Brownhide. I can't ride a subway or go underground. In another interview, she told reporters, it's not normal for someone who's almost 50 years old to be afraid of the dark. The type of nightmares I have, I was prepared to die. I actually had nightmares where somebody me. I saw my own funeral. In response to a reporter asking her questions after the 2013 Alabama bunker hostage crisis, survivor Jody Heffington Medrano said,
let him be open to what he needs to say to them, and let him say it when he needs to say it, not to force it, and to make sure that they do seek out therapy. I also believe that us talking together was very healing for me too, and I think it was healing for the other girls, and I wish that we would have done it sooner.
I think it would have helped us all with many problems that we experienced through our teens and 20s that we may not have had. 6-year-old Larry Park began hearing voices in his head shortly after the kid. When he was 11, they turned violent, and he fantasized about the kidnappers. He battled addiction and schizophrenia for most of his life, but eventually found a better path of counseling others who have similar trauma. Another 9-year-old girl named Darla Neal said, I'm overwhelmed to the point that I had to leave work. I tell myself I should be able to shake this off and deal with it. Yet here I am, a mess. Michael Marshall, one of the boys who helped dig out the exit, is now a father and long-distance truck driver. He has a therapy dog named Blue, who he claims rescues him every day. Ed Ray retired in 1988 and passed away in 2012 at the age of 91. He was a grandfather to 3 grandchildren and a great-grandfather to 3 great-grandchildren. In his final days, he was visited by many of the school children, whom he still kept in touch with over the span of 35 years. This is one of those cases where we thankfully have gotten the answers for why this tragic event occurred. However, although the children survived, many of them are plagued by trauma to this day. Another senseless act played out all because a couple of privileged young men were greedy and evil-minded. Thank you for taking a journey with us through the rise and fall of this story. Watch out for the next video soon. In the meantime, like and subscribe.